well, this talk, as you've already experienced, is going to be live coding, which will either be a lot of fun for you and a lot of fun for me, or no fun for anyone. Actually, even if, okay, oh, sweet. Even if it bombs, you're gonna have a great time because you get to watch me fail at live coding. So this talk is on SVELTE.js. Who here has used Svelte before? Any Svelte users? No Svelte users, awesome. Who here has used a reactive framework like Vue, React, or Ember, or Angular before? Okay, a lot of people. So you're here, you're coding along in your Angular app, and you're looking for something new. I'm kidding. But seriously, Svelte's a really cool framework, and the reason I want to talk about it is because it is newer, but it's kind of an interesting alternative because it has some differences to the way other reactive frameworks work. It's a compile-away framework, which means that it doesn't ship as much of itself into the library. Obviously, you're still shipping Svelte code. But instead of shipping a virtual Dohm implementation, what it does is it compiles down to the actual code that mutates the DOM nodes that you need to change and the things that you need to do to update your the state of your app. So that makes it a little bit different for a couple reasons. Performance is can be better in some areas for things like data viz, or if you're working on low-powered devices. Doing it that way and compiling it away versus shipping a virtual DOM implementation can be a lot faster for performance, and it lets you get to kind of like hard to reach areas where maybe running a larger framework wouldn't be accessible to you. So what we're going to do is we're just going to hop into the code here, and we are going to build a really cool Svelte app in the next 11 minutes. So let's hop in. I've got an app component here, and I just use the Svelte bootstrapper here. Svelte has this, I'll make this way bigger for you. Svelte has this single file component syntax, which is consistent of three things: a script tag, a template, which doesn't have any sort of wrapper. It just goes here in between the script and the style, and then your styles, which is pretty much everything you need to build a web application. This is very similar to Vue, or Angular also can work similarly. So this isn't unheard of, but it's a really nice way to structure your components and keep everything in one place. So what we've got right now is just a basic template. It says hello, all things open, and we're just going to add some basic functionality to this. So we're going to come up here into our script tag, and we're going to create a new variable. Who here has used variables before? I'm kidding. Don't answer that. So I also am going to mention before we get into this talk is Ted Lasso themed. Who here has seen Ted Lasso? Okay, let's go. You're going to like this. The rest of you, you're going to want to watch Ted Lasso when we're done here. Okay, we're going to add a new variable, and we're just going to declare the message, and I'm going to come snag this, and we'll just throw that up in this message variable here. And then we'll interpolate that into the template using Svelte's interpolation syntax. If you've ever worked with a reactive framework, they all work relatively the same here. You're either putting some 2 brackets or 1 bracket or something like that. And so this is no different. And we'll just interpolate our message, and then we'll look at it. It's still there. We'll change it. We'll say hello, all things open. And we'll look at that, and then we'll just make it say hello, Ted Lasso fans, which you all are or will be when we're done here. Awesome. So we've got a reactive variable here, but obviously that's not really enough to build an application. So what I want to look at is how we can now update that variable. And you've seen that we can update that variable ourselves, and the UI will update, but we haven't actually looked at how to update that from an action in the UI. So we're just going to build a simple counter here. Again, this is all the stuff you're going to see in a typical demo. And I'm just going to declare another variable here with a count, and then we're going to add a button, and then we're going to just label the button increment the count, and we'll render out the count so we can see what it is, and then we'll look at it and make sure that I didn't break anything yet. Okay, we've got our little button over here. Can everyone see that? I'll make it one step bigger. Okay, and when we click, it does nothing because we haven't bound an event. So we're going to add an event to the button. We're just going to add an on-click listener. And we'll just add a quick function in here, function increment, and we'll just say count ++. So we're just gonna update this variable. So this is pretty standard JavaScript, right? If you're writing JavaScript for Node or for the browser or for any other place you'd be writing JavaScript, this is how you work with it. This is another thing that's really nice about Svelte is the syntax tries to stay as close to JavaScript as possible. So instead of in React having to use something like setState, or even in Vue if you're using the new setup API, which works similarly to this, or React hooks having to use a ref, Svelte actually builds on top of variables the way they are and makes all of them reactive for you. And so you can write JavaScript the way that you learned, in your first lesson on Code Academy or in your boot camp or wherever you learn JavaScript, and it'll work. So we're just gonna bind this click event to increment, and then we're gonna look and see what we've got. Okay, and now we can increment this count. So this is like your basic Hello World app, right? You've like got some variables and you update it. Okay, now let's get into the fun part. So what we're gonna do in this application is we're gonna get a list of Ted Lasso characters, and then we're gonna list them out, and then we're gonna rank them. And I've also got a live site linked up with Firebase. We're gonna get to that in about 6 minutes, and you're actually gonna be able to hop on your phone, hop on your laptop if you want to. If you're watching live, hop on this URL and you're going to be able to vote. So if you have a character you hate, hop on, just downvote them so hard so they're at the bottom of the list. If you have a character you love, bump them up to the top. And then we're just going to build a little application to kind of show off some of the best parts of Svelte. So let's go ahead and jump into that. I'm just going to uncomment this little bit I've got down here. We're going to get rid of our button. We're going to keep our heading, and we'll see what I messed up so far. Characters not defined. Awesome. So we're just going to import this character component, and I'm just going to let auto import do that for me because I'm incredibly lazy. I'm not going to stand for those double quotes. That's not happening. Okay, so we're just importing a component like you would in a normal application, which lives side by side here. And again, like I talked about, Svelte has this template script style syntax, and one of the cool things about that is they have like their own svelte extension, which is how you label your components. So we're just importing a character component, which we'll go look at real quick. And it just has a div that renders a character, an image, and then some info about that character. This is all hard coded right now, and then we're just gonna kind of pull this all together. So we're gonna get rid of our count stuff down here. We're not using that anymore. And we're gonna get into the meat of this, okay? So we've got our character component. It renders out a character, but this isn't obviously a character. This is a placeholder image, which I found on Google last night. And we want to get this all integrated. So what we need to do is we need to fetch our characters from an API or something like that. And I've just got that locally in a JSON file right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to say let characters equal, and I'm going to use a little fetch wrapper that I created called Yoink. The reason it's called Yoink is because I wanted to I was thinking of yeet as like a cool replacement for fetch, and I Googled what's the opposite of a yeet, because yeet is like throwing something and yoink is getting something. So that's the dumbest name for a library ever, but we're just gonna yoink this request real quick, and we're gonna grab our characters.json file. And then what we're gonna do is we're just gonna use promises to then, once we have our JSON, we're just going to assign it to this character variable that we've instantiated right here. So when this request starts, characters will be assigned to the result of this, which will just be a promise, which will resolve eventually. And then when the promise resolves, we'll actually update that variable to be the actual JSON that we're getting back from the API. So let's do that, and then let's go down here and we will just log out what our characters are to see what we've got coming back here. So if we look at this, characters is not defined, of course. Okay, so we've got a promise, and then when that promise resolves, that's okay. We're going to set characters, the result of the JSON. When our promise resolves, it'll actually contain our characters. That all looks right. That looks like what we want to do. So we're just going to use Svelte's awesome loop syntax in our template here to loop over each character, and we're just going to hit up in each statement here. I'm actually going to let autocomplete help me. And we're going to say each character as characters, each characters as character. And then we're just going to render out a div, and we're just going to render the character name. Okay, and then we're just going to, we'll comment this out for now. And okay, so let's look in the console here. What we've got is an error, and I actually did this on purpose. This is not a bug. First time in the demo that an error was on purpose. And we're just going to look at this. So it says each only iterates over array-like objects. Does anyone have any idea why I'm getting this error? We're currently iterating over a promise, which isn't a thing. Promises are not arrays, they're not array-like, because we're fetching this data and then we're rendering it, but when we go to render the first time, the data hasn't resolved yet, so we're trying to iterate over a promise. This is actually a pretty common characteristic of applications. You have to figure out a way to solve this, and Svelte has this amazing thing built in called async, where you can wait for some data in your template. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap this each statement excuse me, we're going to wrap this each statement in an async block, and it's actually called await. So it's like async await if you've used that in JavaScript. This is very similar, but it actually allows you to do it directly in your template. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create an await block here, and again, I'm going to let autocomplete help us out, and we're just going to say await characters. Okay, and then so the first block here is what we put when we're loading. So we're just going to create a paragraph, and we're just going to say loading characters. Okay, and this is what's going to show until we resolve, and then after that, when we get the characters, we're just going to render this out like we were expecting to earlier. So we'll grab our each statement, we'll move it up here inside of our then, and we'll look at that. Okay, so we no longer, I'm going to get rid of my debugging up here. We no longer have that issue in the console, and if you look at it, we've got our loading characters, and then we display the characters. So like we're getting somewhere here. We've hit an API, we've got data back, and I mean, we're at a pretty small amount of code here for what we're doing. If you're doing this in another framework or even, on your own, you may have like some state for whether that has loaded, whether it hasn't loaded, and then you're doing like an if statement saying like, if your promise is resolved, then go ahead and do this. And that's one of the nice things about Svelte is they think through a lot of these things, and they build in these things to help keep your code small and allow you to build the features that you're looking for. So, all right, we're going to swap this character component, which we've imported, out inside of this div, and we're going to start implementing it. So you've probably all worked on applications before. If you've worked with the reactive framework, you're used to components, props, and events. Svelte is no different. It works the same way. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit up our character here, and because we need to get this data inside of it for each character that we're looping over so that we can render it out, what we're going to do is we're going to pass in our character variable here we're getting from the each loop as a prop. So we're just going to say character equals, and then we're going to bind the result of character to it here. This is kind of an interesting syntax where you have like character equals and then you bind directly to a variable here. But that's how that works. So it would be the same thing if like you wanted to bind a class name to be, if you had like maybe a class name up in your script, you could bind it the same way here. So this is how you bind to an attribute or to a prop in Svelte. So we're just going to pass in our character here. We're going to go hop inside of our component and open up our script. Let me make this big again because it was tiny. Is that pretty readable? I can make it a tab bigger. Awesome. Okay, so we've got our script here, and the way that we accept props in Svelte, this one was a little bit weird to me, but I do like the way it looks now, but it's not super intuitive, is you actually export a variable to receive a prop. So we'll say export let character to tell it like, hey, an export of this component is the fact that we would like to accept a prop. So we export let character, and then we'll check if that works by hopping down into our component, and we'll say character.name. I know you're thinking, oh, wow, this guy is going to go way over time. No, we're getting there. We're getting there quickly. Okay, so we have our name rendered out here. So we've got that data being passed in. And let's just bind a couple other things up here. We've got the whole character, so we're going to bind the image as well. And this is actually a feature I want to show off, is when we bind to this source here, you'll see that we've got a little bit of an error. And when we bind to this source, we're going to bind to character.image. And we'll see that those character images hopefully come through. There's our characters. If you've watched Ted Lasso, you're excited to see some of these guys and gals. Okay, so one thing that you see here is I've got a little squiggly up here, but it does appear to be working. And the reason for that is Svelte has something really amazing built in, which I love, which is accessibility audits. And what it will do is it'll let you know if you're doing anything inaccessible within your templates. And so if I open up my little problems panel down here, or if I ran my build, it would throw these warnings to me. And it's letting me know that images should have an alt attribute, which is a pillar of accessibility, is making sure that your images are properly labeled. So what we're going to do is we're just going to say this is a photo of, and we're going to give it character.name, and we'll see that squiggly line disappear, and it's happy with us again. That's a really cool feature for me. I'm big into accessibility, but I get that it's hard. It's hard to remember. It's hard to even know what things you need to do. And so having that built into a framework is so cool for me. So we're going to do a few other things here. We'll get rid of that. We're going to add a little GIF, which is just going to show up for us when we hover over it. This one, I'm not sure what to do accessibility wise, so I'm going to give it no alt, so it won't be read out to screen readers at all. And we're going to say character.gif here, and that'll give us a nice hover state on our elements here. Okay, so now we've got our images pulled through and our names pulled through, and we're doing pretty good, but we still need to build out this upvoting system. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab our scores, and we're going to pull those into our main app component. Those are going to live at the top, and then we're going to pass the score for each individual person down into their component. So we're going to come out here. We're going to put the scores right here, and we'll move this down, keep everything together. We're going to put the scores up here at the top. And what we need to do is we need to pass the scores in for each person, and then we need to allow you to increment them and decrement them, to upvote and downvote. So we've got our scores, and we'll create a function which allows you to upvote people, and we'll just take the name as a parameter, and then we'll just go scores name plus plus, or scores name minus minus for downvote. Depending on if you're a negative person, you're going to love this downvote function. Okay, awesome. So we've got our base functionality there. So let's go ahead and pass the score in for each person as a prop. Again, we're going to pass that in as a prop with the syntax, and we're just going to bind it to the result of a variable. And it's just going to be the score and then the character name as our key. And that will pass in the score for us. Again, anytime we pass a prop in, we have to accept it. So we're going to come up to the top here, and we're going to say score. And then in our template, we're going to update this 421, which was Ted's score initially, to be the score. And if all that worked, then we've got our initial scores pulling through. It didn't work. Score is not defined. You sure about that? Must be out here. Score and its scores. So just got to fix that. Live coding issues. Awesome. So we've got our people, and their scores are passing through, so we just need to be able to increment and decrement. And if you've worked with the reactive framework before, the way that we're going to handle that is with props and events, right? So props pass data down, events trigger updates to that data by sending out an event saying, hey, we would like you to update this, and then give me a fresh copy. So what we're going to do is inside of our component, when we click the upvote and the downvote button, what we're going to do is we're going to emit an event. Svelte has something built in for this called I can never remember the name, so I saved a snippet, called create event emitter, event dispatcher, I believe. So we're going to import that, and then down below we'll create a dispatcher, and we'll say const dispatch equals create event dispatcher. And then right down here, when we click on this, we're just going to put, like we did before, we're going to bind a click handler to that, and we're just going to say dispatch an event that we would like to upvote or downvote, and that's going to dispatch an event for us. And then we can listen for it on the component, just like we can listen for events on a Dohm node or on anything else. So we're just going to listen for those events, and then we're going to say on upvote, and you see I've got a nice autocomplete for that built in. That's a sweet feature of the VS Code plugin, which I'm using here. And okay, so on an upvote event, we're going to call our upvote plugin, and we're just going to pass in the name. So we're just going to call upvote. That's not how you do this. There you go. Upvote and then character.name, and then the same thing down here. We're going to listen for downvote, and we're going to call downvote. And with any luck, we've got that working, and we can, no luck. On upvote, upvote. This is not the right syntax. I don't believe. We need to inline a function here that'll get invoked. So awesome. Also not correct. All right, so I'm going to skip to the good part here, which is where I integrate with Firebase. If you're still with us, head on your phone and go to svelteislife.netlify.app. svelte-is.life.netlify.app. Start voting on these characters, and what I'm going to do in the meantime is show a cool feature of Svelte here, where instead of building this logic ourselves, I'm going to use a composable hook that I've created using stores, which is a cool feature of Svelte. And we're just going to come in here, and we're going to call this function, which I'm going to import. So I'm going to import a function for this from stores. And so it'll be store slash use real-time character stores. And then we're going to import that function from it. And then I'm going to call it, and it's going to give me back data and actions. So we'll call that down here, and we'll just say scores equal use real-time character scores. And then scores, I can swap that out down here in my template. When you're using a store in Svelte, instead of a local variable, you prefix it with a $sign when you invoke it, which automatically subscribes to that store. There's a lot there, but it can't fit it into this talk. And then down here, we'll just call scores.upvote and scores.downvote. And let's refresh and see where we're at with that. We need to get the, let's see if we're getting any output in the terminal here. Localhost. These are not the right scores, so let's see what we've got going on here. Use real-time character scores. Should be pulling from that API. Pulling scores here. Passing the score in, and then we're calling scores.upvote and scores.downvote. So I must have botched something in my demo here. I'm going to swap over to the live site where you can see the final. And what we've got here is the final result, where I see you guys are upvoting Danny Rojas. Thank you for that. He's the best character. Svelte is life, football is life. Sam is being upvoted as well. Love to see that. He's the coolest. Someone may have set up a bot here. This is going up pretty quickly. We've got Ted Lasso. We've got an animation here. So the last thing I want to show real quick is that animation that we've got going on, which is swapping these out. That's a one-line code change in Svelte, which is fantastic. They've got really great animation and transition primitives built in. So if we come back here and you'll refresh, you'll see that these guys are just kind of popping in, which isn't the best view for that. So what we're going to do is we're going to add an animation to, or a transition to this div here. So we're just going to say when it's coming in, we want to fade in. And then you'll see that fade, it gives us a little squiggly here because it's not defined. And that is something that you actually have to import from Svelte, which is awesome because it means that it doesn't affect your bundle size unless you use it. So we're just going to import fade from svelte/transition. And we'll save that. And then with any luck here, it looks like my localhost isn't updating. Let me just refresh here because it's not updating. Here you go. Okay, it doesn't like my, okay, that's why. I knew something was wrong here because it did not like that at all. Okay, cool. So we should be where I expected us to be locally now, which is pulling the real-time character scores and being able to update them, as well as having our fade in animation here, which you'll see is happening. And then the only other thing that we add here for the animation for when they're switching and we're just, you know, they're jumping spots dynamically, is another one-line change, which is just amazing. Like doing that for myself, trying to build that custom in another framework or on my own would take me an incredibly long time. So what we're going to do is we're going to say animate, and then when we're animating it, because it's moving for some reason, we're going to use the flip animation, which is an animation, I think it stands for first, last, in between, or first, last, invert, and play, which is pretty much a cool way to say it calculates a really fast and smart animation for two things changing places. And so again, you see that that's not defined here, and so we need to import it, and we're just going to come up here and import flip from svelte/animation, and then you'll see with any luck, it didn't like that animate. Let's see. Awesome. And then we just need to add a key here, which I'm not going to get into because of time, but this just says how it knows to order this list and how to update things. And so we're just going to add a key of character.name. And then when I upvote one of these guys to pass another one, let's see if any of these change places. Here we go. Then when these are changing places on the live site, you'll see that they animate like that. So that's a one-line code change there. So that's all I've got for you. Thank you for coming.